Is it Junkyard 4.8 your favorite LS? We've got some upgrades for you. But don't worry, if it's not, these mods apply to everything else. In this video, we're going to take a look at a number of upgrades we applied to a Junkyard 4.8 liter. We installed a carburetor, a camshaft, nitrous, a supercharger. We even applied E85 run with the supercharger. But guess what? If you don't have a 4.8, if you have a 5.3, a 5.7, yes, even an LS1 for my boys down in Australia, a 6.0, a 6.2, or even a 7 liter, all these modifications make a factory LS, any factory LS, even better.
To get this test started, obviously I went to the Junkyard, my favorite place in the world, and picked up a 4.8 liter. In reality, when I went to the Junkyard, I was looking for a 5.3, but as it turned out, it was a 4.8 liter. But, you know, there are no bad choices. The 4.8 liter works equally well, although we would pick different things for the 4.8 than we would for the 5.3 just because of the change in displacement. So we got this motor up on the dyno, and unfortunately for the guys at West Tech, it was not a very clean example. I need to take these things over and actually spray them off before we run them on the dyno, but this one did not get that treatment, unfortunately. So we hooked this thing up, and we were going to run this thing initially carbureted, so we removed the factory truck intake manifold. Now again, we picked a single plane intake for this 4.8 liter, not because I think that that's an ideal choice. As a matter of fact, it's not an ideal choice. For the 4.8 liter especially, I would definitely pick a dual plane like the RPM for Mandelbrot, or Holley makes one also. I would pick a dual plane for a 4.8 liter for any kind of application, whether this thing has a stock cam, which we ran it here, or any kind of camshaft, and we put a fairly big camshaft in this thing. I would still pick a dual plane over a single plane on the smaller 4.8 liter. It just works well. It adds a ton of torque down low and doesn't trade any power at the top on the smaller displacement until very, very high RPM. And you won't miss a little bit of extra power at the very top that a single plane might give you, or it might not on the 4.8, even a cammed one. Dual plane, definitely the way to go. But we put this thing up on the dyno with long tube headers. We ran a single plane Victor Jr. intake, a 650 Brawler carburetor, and we controlled the timing with the MSD. In this case, we just upped the timing until we got the power that we wanted and started not making any more power, which is in the 31 to 32 degree range. For you guys that are wondering what kind of jetting that we use, we did jet this Brawler carburetor. And here is the jetting. 74-76 split front to back. It was fairly even. That 650 Brawler works fairly well, and it's inexpensive, so it's a good combination on this 4.8. Equipped with our Brawler carburetor and headers, a Mazir electric water pump, our otherwise kind of stock Junkyard motor produced 331 horsepower and 316 foot-pounds of torque. So our first test, let's take a look and see what happened when we added a camshaft. And we added a fairly good-sized cam. Again, not chosen because I thought that it was ideal, only more because this is the cam that I happened to have laying around that we wanted to test. So here's what happened when we installed the cam. This was a fairly good-sized cam. This was a Comp 54-454-11 camshaft. And here are the specs on that camshaft. It is a 614, 624 lift, 227, 243, and a 113. And actually for this combination, that's probably a little more cam than you need in a 4.8, although it did fairly well. We only started the load down at 3,500. Down lower, you probably would lose a little bit, but that's a pretty good sized camshaft, but it did well. This thing produced 440 horsepower, and peak torque was up to 353 foot-pounds of torque. So, and obviously we added a valve spring upgrade. Now you could put 26-918 comps, anybody's single, dual, or single beehive upgrade, or a good dual spring for this thing, and they all work well, especially in this RPM range. Now let's take a look at the rest of our mods, our 4.8 liter. After installation of the camshaft in our Junkyard 4.8 liter, our carbureted Junkyard 4.8 liter, the easiest step for us to add even more power was just to add nitrous. In fact, I think it's probably even easier than adding a turbo setup, because the turbo setup is pretty involved even on a Junkyard motor. I know that it's cheap and makes a ton of power, but for most guys, just putting a simple carbureted plate system on is really easy, and plumbing that takes almost no time at all. You can get that up and running easily in a couple of hours. And here's what happens when you do that. And I like the nitrous stuff because it's really easy to add power, and you can adjust it it. You know, if you get the right kind of kit, you can add 50 horsepower, 75, 100. I mean, all the way up. Some of these kits can go over 300. We've run 300 horsepower from a simple plate system. If you could take a look, that video is up already. But we've run 300 shots on a junkyard motor, and we even did it on one that didn't have extra ring gap, which it probably should have. But we basically maxed the plate out. I'm not sure if we maxed the plate or maybe the solenoids, because no matter what we did to the jetting, it just wouldn't flow anymore. So it was one of the two. It was either the flow rate of that particular one was a Zex perimeter plate. So it was either the flow rate of the perimeter plate or the flow rate of the solenoid. It just wouldn't flow anymore. But 300 shot on a junkyard motor adds a lot. Now, we didn't do that on this one. I just wanted to show what would happen. We added a simple sniper kit on this one. And here's what happened. As you can see, that's why I like nitrous so much, and the same reason I like boost so much is because you can get such a big gain in power from what is a relatively simple and easy to install modification. So in this case, the power output jumped to 554 horsepower. We retarded the timing about 4 degrees on this combination, and you can see, nice simple curve. We activated this thing about 4,800 or so, and it was kind of all in a little bit after that. And you could run this earlier if you want to. There are guys obviously that hit it like right off the line, and you can do that. You can do progressive controllers so that you can taper this thing in so it doesn't hit really hard off the line. You guys use it to, get the stall speed up on the converter, because if you add power, that happens. There's lots of tricks that you can play to really make this stuff work well, but you're going to feel an extra 100 or 125 horsepower. And as I said, you can go up in jetting. Just make sure that you pick a kit that has enough flow rate, not just with the jetting, which that's a fairly easy thing to change, but make sure the solenoids are capable of flowing the amount that you want. And then obviously also something that we always do is we make sure that the bottle is the right temperature, make sure that the bottle is full, make sure that the pressure is where it needs to be. That way when you activate the nitrous, you have full nitrous flow, and then make sure that you have the tune right. As I said, we pulled away 4 degrees of timing, and we made sure that the air fuel was correct. A lot of guys want to run the thing very, very rich. That's not a good idea. A lot of guys that are making lots of power with nitrous actually run the nitrous combinations a lot leaner than you would think. And it works fairly well. So here's what happened when we added the nitrous. So now let's take a look and see what happened when we took our Junkyard 4.8 and added boost. After doing the cam upgrade and then nitrous on our 4.8 liter, it was time for boost. Now normally when we go get a junkyard motor, and do a cam and spring upgrade, we will add a single turbo or twin turbos to it, and that's a good way to go, and you can make a ton of power. But we wanted to do something different. There are plenty of videos I have up if you're interested in watching to find out what happens when you add a turbo to a junkyard motor. There's lots of that stuff up, but in this case I added a TORQSTORM supercharger. Now here are a couple things you need to know. A TORQSTORM supercharger is a centrifugal blower like a Vortec or a ProCharger, so it has a rising boost curve. It is attached to the motor and is driven directly, but because of the way that you can think of a centrifugal supercharger basically as a impeller from a turbo, but driven off the crankshaft. So it has to spin a lot of RPM, so it starts out low and ends up high. What you have is a rising boost curve with the peak boost coming basically at peak RPM. So we have a power curve that's shaped accordingly, unlike a turbo that spools up and then can carry the boost out with, depending on how you have your wastegate set. So we ran the TORQSTORM supercharger. The other thing to know about the TORQSTORM is basically it is a really good 700 to 750 horsepower supercharger. You're not going to make too much more than that unless you really push the heck out of it, and even then it is a really good 700 to 750 horsepower blower. If you want to make more than that, they do offer kits where you can run 2 of them, and then you can double that amount if that's what you want to do. But in this case, we ran the TORQSTORM supercharger on our blow-through carbureted 4.8 liter, and here's what happened. So we ran the TORQSTORM first, fuel injected, or carbureted, blow-through carburetor, but we ran it with race gas, and I had enough timing in it. In this case, we had about 23 degrees of total timing in it. This thing produced 670 horsepower or so, and as you can see, it still had a rising curve and was still climbing kind of at our shutoff point past 6,500 RPM. You can keep revving this thing if you want. We had our blow-through carburetor, our CSU blow-through 850. that allowed us to adjust, obviously, the jetting and also the boost reference power valve, so we can tailor our air fuel curve and get everything dialed in. But this wasn't the only test that we ran. Obviously, we knew running the blower on here was going to definitely make more power. But what I also wanted to try, I wanted to demonstrate the difference between this kind of race gas and then E85. And what I did was we just replaced the fuel. I did not change the timing, which you definitely could do. You could add more timing because the E85 obviously is cooler and has enough octane where you would be able to do that. But the timing level remained the same, and all we did was change the fuel. So here's what happened when we added the E85. We picked up quite a bit of power. We were up near 700 horsepower in the mid 690 range. Peak torque was up to 571 foot-pounds from 547 foot-pounds. So you can see, boost always does fantastic things. If you've got a Junkyard 4.8 with a cam in it and then you add boost, you can make a lot of power even on this combination. And we weren't at the limit of what that blower would do. We could spin it faster. We could run, a big air-to-water intercooler on it with ice water and stuff. You could do a lot of things to make this thing more, but once we get in the 750 range, it gets harder and harder to get gains. And if you want to get more than that, obviously you can add an S475 turbo or a 7875 from the guys at BS Racing, anything like that, if you want to make more power. This is what happened when we added our TORQSTORM, and this concludes all the modifications we did to the 4.8 on this round of dyno testing. Let's get to our conclusion.
Okay guys, what do you think about the upgrades on our Junkyard 4.8 liter? First off, I know all the EFI guys don't use carburetors, those things are toilets. The reality is that carburetors work just fine. They've worked for years. They still work. The thing about carburation versus fuel injection, pick the right manifold. If we run a carburetor versus EFI on the same manifold, guess what? They both do very well. I don't know what the deal is. I don't know why EFI guys hate carburetors and carburetor guys hate EFIs. They both work really well, and they both work well on this 4.8 liter. Now let's talk a little bit about nitrous oxide. Every cam is a nitrous cam, just like every cam is a boost cam. Only when you get into the rarefied air. Let's say if we were trying to add 500 horsepower like I did on the Big Bang motor, 500 horsepower with a nitrous to a 500 horsepower motor, then yes, maybe a nitrous cam is definitely going to help you out. But guess what? I've run hundreds of tests on adding nitrous to a variety of different camshafts, a variety of different motors, all kinds of engine families. And every time I add nitrous, if you do it properly, if we add nitrous, 100 shot of nitrous to a stock cam, it adds 100 horsepower. If we add 100 shot of nitrous to a mild truck cam, it adds 100 horsepower. If we add 100 shot of nitrous to a stage 2 turbo cam, it adds 100 horsepower. That's what nitrous does. The amount of power that you get from nitrous is primarily dependent on the amount of nitrous you add to that combination. The camshaft is not going to come into play until the very extreme edges. If you're trying to add 2 or 3 or 4 kits to your combination, then yes, nitrous cam. Otherwise, for 95% of us, every cam is a nitrous cam, just like every cam is a turbo cam. It works well on almost anything. Now the TORQSTORM supercharger. I know all the turbo guys are going to go, yeah, it's much cheaper and much better and blah, 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 add a turbo. We've done lots and lots of turbo 4.8 and 5.3 and 6.0 videos. Yes, add a turbo to a junkyard motor with a cam and springs, and that works well. I'm just trying to show something else. They all can't be junkyard turbo motors, junkyard motors with turbos on them, because we know that works well. Here's how the TORQSTORM works. It worked really well, and I was primarily interested in showing what the gain was from adding E85. I did not turn the timing up on that test. The timing stayed the same. All we did was change the fuel. We kept the air fuel constant, at least the ratio constant, with the E85, and I know we have to add more fuel, blah, 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 blah. We did it right. E85 all by itself adds power over the 100 octane race gas that we were using before. We kept the timing the same. We had enough octane with our race gas to have a good amount of timing, so it worked well with the race gas and with the E85. E85 all by itself, even before you add extra timing, adds power. I'm Richard Holder, guys. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. I will keep testing more and more every day and bring it to you guys.